this idea that there is a random universe that is being pushed so much. Neuro-existentialism, we're in this deep malaise because the entire universe has no meaning and it's completely random, which of course is born out of 20th century existentialism, Jean-Paul Sartre and people like that, who after the war couldn't understand how it was possible that the universe could be doing what it was doing to them, and had to come up with some sort of philosophical argument to make themselves feel correct. And I watched a lot of clips of people like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, but they kept not making sense. They kept contradicting themselves all the time. Like people like Richard Dawkins, absolutely adamant that there is no design in the universe, and are constantly talking about the laws of nature. And my first question is, where is this random universe that these people are talking about? Because in fact, I will freely say right now that I'm not so sure that this random universe actually exists. I mean, if you have an apple seed and you put it in the ground, and if the ground's okay and you get enough rain and you get enough sun, you're not going to get a pear tree. You're not going to get a strawberry plant, and you most certainly aren't going to get an elephant come from the apple seed. You're going to get an apple tree. And you can do this over and over and over, and you can get an apple seed, and there's no randomness about what will come up. My children are very big on dinosaurs at the moment, and we often sit down and look at dinosaur documentaries. And in fact, there's a bit of a revolution in dinosaur paleontology at the moment. I've got a little prop here today. This is a triceratops. Okay, can you see that? Okay, it's got this flange here, this bone flange. Now, up until recently, all assumed that that was a shield, or some sort of weapon that it used in fighting, and of course it's got horns as well, and the horns were also seen as that. Now, recently, paleontologists said, oh no, that's too heavy, that would weigh the triceratops down, and it would be so cumbersome it couldn't possibly be used for fighting. And so now what they think is that it's like a peacock's feathers, and in fact this is quite a few paleontologists are saying that dinosaurs were thanks Brock, dinosaurs were brightly colored, and this was a sexual attraction device, and it also had something like the dinosaur is saying, look how much extra genetic material I've got surplus, and I can grow this huge big flange on my head. I actually personally believe the original Marshall explanation that it was something to do with fighting. I think it's a bit of fantasy that they're talking about. I mean, they're even talking about some of these horns were used to tickle their partner to get them sort of sexually prepared and things like that. They weren't for fighting at all. They were actually foreplay devices. This is the point. These same, like Richard Dawkins and these atheists who are absolutely adamant there's no design in nature, it's all completely random, these same evolutionary biologists or paleontologists will never accept anything is by chance. There must be a reason that this dinosaur has this flange. And if it cannot be explained, they will find an answer, or whatever, you know, the horns here, or the color of it. In other words, where's this random universe that these people are talking about? But in fact, it's also underpinned by Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which I will briefly explain. When these quantum physicists are doing experiments with particle accelerators, and they're getting mesons and photons and accelerating them and where they collide. This is Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. It's actually quite an important thing to understand. Where they are colliding, there's a 60% chance that the mesons and photons in the subatomic particles will create the same piece of matter that's making our table or our computer or the light or the wall or whatever. There's a 60% chance that they will do that. There's a 30% chance that they will actually create something else. And of the 10% chance left, there's sort of this infinite number of other possibilities that these mesons and photons could make, potentially make, theoretically make, okay? But the thing is, this is the miracle, all right? This is the design, if you like, is that this table keeps being this table moment after moment. The subatomic particles, as they're colliding in free fall, are continually making the same table, despite the fact that, according to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, it's just a random selection that they're doing. So theoretically, the universe is chaos. But in actual reality, how often do tables disappear? How often do we plant an apple seed and get an elephant? Now, theoretically, we could do that. According to quantum physics, we could plant an apple seed and get an elephant. According to quantum physics, there's a tree growing in the middle of this room, theoretically. But the thing is that, when does this ever happen? I've never seen it, and I've never seen any record of anything like this happen that I could believe. Obviously, there are some stories that we hear that are trying to push some of these things, and I also am not averse to, as we discussed in our last interview, Phil, you know, there are things that were used to be called miracles, like magnetic healing and things like this, that now we understand through quantum physics, which brings me to the next point, of course, that things like the interconnected nature of the universe has come from, you know, our understanding of this has come through quantum physics. But that's something that we can experience with the oceanic feeling, with meditative states. And it's also something that makes sense by things like gravity. I talked about Newton, who had been disparaged for the separate building blocks universe that Descartes and the other modernists have been pushing forward for so long. What Newton is guilty of, and the theory of gravity as part of that, is the mechanical universe. And he is often disparaged for being one of the main scientists or the main voices who have shown us the universe is mechanical. In other words, it's not random, it's mechanical. Before Newton, God made tides come in and out. After Newton, we understood that was the gravitational pull of the moon. So it was a mechanical thing. In other words, this is the God of the gaps. As we understand the mechanics of nature more,
God of the gaps, that's an interesting...
And Newton did that. It's like, in another video I made, I talked about Einstein, who said time was an illusion, albeit a persistent one. Again, in meditative states, we can experience that. In divination, right, we're working with that understanding, okay? And in dreams, we will often experience prophetic insights. It's one of the most common things that I've heard from so many people. I've experienced it myself, of having prophetic insight, flashes of the future of your own life in your dreams. It is very common. Even Jung wrote about that, that often his patients, before they came to see him, before their first visit, they would have a dream, a significant dream. So the idea of time being an illusion, which comes also out of quantum physics, is something that we can have some sort of tangible experience of. The idea that the universe is interconnected is something that is basically visible to us anyway. We can get sunburned from the sun that's 8 light minutes away. Do you understand? It's connecting with us across all of that space, right? And of course the gravity from the moon changing the tides. So the interconnected, the invisible interconnected synchronicity and all of these things, that's something that's tangible. But the idea that the universe is random, the idea that there is no order in the universe, is a myth in the colloquial sense of the term myth. In other words, it's just a fallacy. Dawkins was always disparaging this idea that there was a design to the universe. And yet I remember he was interviewed, and the interviewer actually asked him, is there anything that doesn't make sense? Is there anything that sort of isn't for a reason? And, you know, I suppose he's made it public himself. It's a public video, so I'll give you his answer. And it was, yeah, I just can't understand why we have to have sex to procreate, you know. That was it. That was the only thing that he could come up with that didn't make sense, that wasn't part of a totally ordered universe. And I mean, again, these people, these atheist biologists and that, they'll say, well, you know, there's a particular muscle, right, that has a shell and the lid doesn't close perfectly. So where's your God? Because there's not a perfectly closing lid on this one muscle, or even our eye, I think, is not quite perfect. So because God is such a bad engineer, you know, that's not a good term, but the creator or the intelligence behind, even intelligent design is a term I don't like either, it having been hijacked by fundamentalist Christians and given some pretty crazy connotations. But the point is that really searching long and hard to try and find some mistakes in the universe, and all that is doing is showing that, well, the universe is becoming, the universe is still in a process of evolution. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, sure, okay, that mollusk that they're talking about, or that mussel that hasn't got a perfectly closing shell, you know, give it 1,000,000 years. It's not finished. The paint's not dry yet. And it's the same with humans. I mean, goodness me, I'm sure there have been many times when I thought, God, what did you do? Why did you make humans? And then I just sort of reconcile myself with the idea, because of course I don't believe in the random universe, which is why I'm a conspiracy theorist. All the people that have a problem with conspiracy theorists will be saying, yeah, we know that the universe is totally in order, if you like, the mechanical universe, but humans are random. And in fact, these same people, these same anthropologists and sociologists and social scientists that are saying this, coming out with this idea that conspiracy theorists are afraid of a random universe, and we've got to come out with some sort of theory to make order out of chaos. They're spending all day, these people are spending all day making stereotypes and looking at formulaic propositions for why people are like that. For example, Hitler. They've done a profile on Hitler. He had a doting mother, a domineering father, and his particular situation in time and space where he was created him to be like that. I remember when I was a contractor working on a building site, I was doing the painting and I was talking to the builder, and he said to me, what do you think about gangs? Because in New Zealand at the time we had a big problem with ethnic gangs, and I said, well, you know, you get unemployment, you get rich next to poor people, and it's a mathematical formula. It's like adding 1 + 1 = 2. And he said, yep, that's how I see it. It's like people are products of their environment. And I mean, we know now that a fact that has been assumed all the way through the social sciences is that in neurology now we know that the material structure of the brain is actually formed by our early socialization. So the idea of being brainwashed, I mean, is no exaggeration. This is what sociologists are doing all the time. They're doing this all day, every day. And in fact, they actually take it to a much greater extreme than I would ever go as a psychologist, as a humanistic psychologist. This existentialist idea of we've got a malaise because we're living in this so-called random universe, this meaningless random universe. We have no inherent idea of a self, which is again what we talked about in the last interview. This idea is still holding on there, that in neuro-existentialism, that we have no inherent idea of self, which is false. It's a false premise. It's been demonstrated conclusively in developmental psychology that because the baby has the inbuilt instinctual ability to not only make relationships with its caregivers, but also to structure them in a hierarchy, that implies that the baby has a sense of self right from the moment it's born. But that idea is counter to the trajectory that the education system is pushing us into. They're pushing us into this idea that it's a random, chaotic universe, which is absolutely false. They're pushing us into the idea of the separate building blocks universe, despite the fact that quantum physics and basic common sense is telling us that everything is interconnected. And they're pushing us into this idea that we have no inherent self. This is actually part of the conspiracy.